Today on the Self Smarter Podcast.
We have identities and they're encased with habits. Mm-hmm. And I think what's interesting is if you start to diagnose for yourself, what are my habits that are improving the identity of who I want to be or become, and which habits are keeping me from that.
Hi, we're Danelle and Megan, the hosts of this conversation-centric podcast for leaders seeking to be better every day. Whether you choose to be a leader in the workplace, at home, or in your community, we believe the most effective leaders are equipped to not only be self-starters, but self-smarter.
Hello, and welcome to Self Smarter. I'm Megan, and this is my friend and co-host, Danelle.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much for being patient with us last week as we got through the snowstorm. There's always one every year.
Well, now there is.
Yeah, it seems like it. It's odd.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in New York City, it's like spring.
Meanwhile, I'm wearing windbreakers. Well, we had one day of sub degree, but I've lived here since September, and I've traveled some, but I still haven't seen a snowflake.
That's so funny.
It's the beginning of February. I have not seen one snowflake.
True story. When she was first talking about moving to New York, she was all, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to make it through January and February with all the snow. And now here we are. There's not 1 ounce of snow. We're getting the snow.
No, I went out for a walk this morning and it was before 9 a.m. before 9 a.m. your time. And it was in the mid 40s. It was beautiful. It is beautiful today.
Awesome.
I don't know what's going on, but there's a little bit of a weather update from
Yes.
But we did have, it was odd. I will say it was odd me being here and knowing that all of you, so the entire company was work remote last week. Drew was work remote. I mean, it was like everybody I knew was stuck at home. And meanwhile here,
you're out frolicking in the park, having a little skip-a-doo in the park. I love it.
I was not skipping in the park, but okay. All right.
So when this airs, it's going to be the 13th of February, which means tomorrow is Valentine's Day. For those of you that subscribe to Valentine's Day. So my question to you this morning was, what do you think, Danelle? Is it a marketer's day or a lover's day? Which one?
Oh, come on.
It's a marketer's day.
Look around. It's a marketer's day.
100%. I'm with you.
100%. It's a marketer's day. Yeah. You should, every day should, if you have love on your heart, should, for whoever or whatever that is, it should be every day.
It's actually kind of sad. I started thinking about it this weekend. I've had a lot of time to think. And I was thinking, who thought of this? Like, do we have to designate? It's like Mother's Day. Grateful for Mother's Day. Mm-hmm. Don't need it. Every day is Mother's Day. I'm reminded by the clothes piles, the dirty dishes, the responsibilities. It's like with Valentine's Day, like you don't have to have a day to tell me you love me. It's just another day.
Okay. Well, it's not Valentine's Day and we love you, Meg.
Yay. Thank you.
But on that day, and I don't know, it just starts to open up a can of worms. I just think about kids and all the pressure and I like, ew, like it is, I don't know. And it's not that I'm not a romantic or I don't have fuzzy feelings. It's just.
You don't need a designated day to say this is the day.
No. And I can tell you throughout most of my adult life, I celebrated Valentine's with absolutely the number one thing I love the most is food and wine. So that's it. I turned it into a reason to have a great meal.
Totally. Which a lot of people do. And it's impossible to go out on Valentine's Day.
No, and it was for us. And that's when we started, making these amazing meals at the house. So anyway.
Right. Well, and no matter
what. For those of you hopeless romantics, probably most of the twos on the Enneagram.
Yes.
You do you and your doilies and cutouts and hearts and things.
Oh, yeah. Happy Valentine's Day, you guys. Happy Valentine's Day.
God, we both sound like Glennon Doyle today.
We do. We're all in our four. We're all in our four and emotive Valentine's Day. We don't have a crystal ball. By the time this airs, it will not only be Valentine's Day, but it will also be the day after the Super Bowl.
Okay.
And the one thing that I can predict for sure, that I know 100% is going to happen, is that the Cowboys are not going to win. The Cowboys are not winning the Super Bowl this year. And nor are they playing in it, which I hear about a lot at home.
Yes, no, they're not at all playing in it, but I'm going to predict that Rihanna nails
Yes.
the halftime. So I'm excited to see what's up her sleeve for her performance.
Yeah,
So I'm looking forward to that. The game, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to
yeah.
talk about my feelings about the Eagles. I will talk about my feelings about Kansas City because they are playing. And I know that, what do you think about Kansas City? You want to see the underdog win. Do you think they're the underdog in this case?
In my opinion, yeah, the way the seasons have gone, yeah, I think with Kansas City, I haven't seen what the line is on the numbers yet, but my guess is that they're the underdog because, man, Philly just had one hell of a year, pouncing all over everybody. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
It'll be interesting. But yeah, my feelings for Kansas City are as yours are. I root for the underdog and the Texas boy.
That's right. Patrick Mahomes, the most precious person in the NFL. And
he's what?
He's the most precious person in the NFL. And according to me and everyone who went to Texas Tech.
According to you and all the Texas Tech Red Raiders.
He's our big success story. So we got to root for him. All right. Before we jump into Atomic Habits, let's skip to this quick commercial. Okay. What I'm about to tell you is no joke, podcast listeners. One of the things we pride ourselves on at DMA is our ability to analyze marketing performance with the best of them. To share the love in 2023, we're selling our competitive assessments for businesses 50% off our regularly published price. That's right. To find out more, connect with me at info@dma-solutions.com and find out how we can put you in a position to win smarter in 2023. Danelle, you were super keen on talking about Atomic Habits, like big time. And not only for this podcast, but also for our business.
Yeah, Atomic. Here's kind of the backstory with this is that when the 26% approval rating, which I guess we're not coming up on 9 years, I think we've spent almost 50 episodes talking about 8 years ago, but I think we've gone through the calendar year. So I guess I would say that was 9 years ago. One of the things that I was trying to either relearn or learn for the first time was showing up better as a leader. And a lot of that required habits. So I would pick up books on productivity, like what do successful leaders do and how do they behave and what are they doing? And, I think some of the stuff was good. It was a lot of common sense stuff, but nothing really stuck with me. But what I didn't realize is that I was not taking this as I normally would do other challenges. I wasn't saying, okay, I want to be, a specific aspect of leadership. I didn't just hone in on that. I decided that I wanted to become a better leader, which is an identity. And I didn't realize that that is what I had done at the time, or the commitment I'd made to myself and to all of you, but it was. And so then when we heard the podcast on EntreLeadership with James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, I was shaken to my core because for the first time I could visually see the importance of establishing an identity to drive your habits versus just a goal. So that's where we were introduced to Atomic Habits, and we read this book together as a company 2 years ago.
Yes.
Was it 2 years ago? Was it during the pandemic?
Yeah, or it was right after. I mean, we were back here. We were back in the office.
Okay. So it was, okay, then it was. I
want to say 2021. I mean, it was.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, coming up. So anyway, and I just think his approach and the way he guides us in this book and we'll talk about his teachings and how you can continue to learn from him later in the episode. But I find it to be, he makes something that we think we understand. He teaches us the science of it.
Yes.
And then to me, his approaches are just you're able to remember them and you're able to apply them easily. So it's not like do these 8 steps to get where you need to go. It's like rewire your brain, which obviously I'm interested in right now. I'm doing that in every aspect of my life,
right,
including my therapy. So it's, it was fun to go back to his teachings on this level. I mean, we were subscribed to his newsletter, so we hear from him every week. But it was good to go back and revisit some of the stuff because to me, you just can't be reminded enough of how integral small steps towards progress or can impact our lives. So.
Yeah, he's got a really cool Genesis. So if not for anything else, highly recommend that everybody read it. And I know that's why we're talking about it today, but the way that he arrives to the Atomic Habits line of thinking is really special and different. Yeah. So I think it's important on that note for us to start by defining what an atomic habit is. So what is it?
Well, I mean, you break it down, atomic means extremely small amount of something, and it's the source of immense energy. So then you're thinking a habit, it's a routine or practice performed regularly. So James had, again, to echo what Megan said, he has an incredible origin story about how he got to this, to study this particular type of behavioral science, if you will, is that he was injured as a sophomore in high school, like tragically, like almost died, like bad. And I won't run any of it for you, but what he did to recover from that accident where he really shouldn't have and be able to compete at the collegiate level in baseball. Once again, he was on his way. He was already a great baseball player, but I mean, this injury it took him years to recover. And so what he did in his mind in order to get to the ultimate outcome is to be a baseball player again. He did these things. And so he was able to reflect on what he was able to do to recover. And that became the genesis really of his body of work, his career. And then obviously he's gone on to study the science, the behavioral and cognitive science behind how habits work. And so I love him as a storyteller. He's very similar to Brene, and Brene Brown loves him. And I'll talk about that in a second. But he's an incredible storyteller. So he teaches you the information. He uses story to guide that information. And he also backs everything up with science, which to me validates all that that we had the opportunity to learn from. So I love that. I think the beginning of the book is the most powerful piece of it because that's where that yumminess is. And then the rest of the book is really his framework, his 4 steps for, how habits actually work. So just FYI, if you're going to do anything, read the beginning of the book, because for some of you, I think the audience is probably mixed, of our listeners. And I know we were as a company, some of us were, had already in many ways mastered habits. And some of us were, in some ways we were good at habits, maybe in the workplace, but in personal lives, we were struggling with certain things. And I think, that changes for everyone. It depends on what it is that we're trying to overcome, right? And it probably depends on what's going on with seasons of life. And so I just think it's an interesting lesson, no matter where you are on the journey of habits, because I promise you at some point, you're going to need to think differently about a habit or a routine than maybe what you've been successful at previously, because I was pretty successful at certain things relative to habits until I decided that I wanted to become a better leader. That's different than I want to be able to do a 5K. So we'll break that down in a second as well. So that's really the attraction to his teachings. That's really in a nutshell where it comes from.
Well, and 2, if you are a mother of a 16-year-old, or if you have been, and you're listening to this story about a 16-year-old, their mindset at the time and how advanced they are, it really makes you feel like a crappy parent. At least it did for me. Because I was like, oh my gosh, this man is so advanced and evolved. You know what I mean? He was able to pull himself out of a gutter, basically, at least emotionally.
And he didn't realize what he was doing. He just got it right.
That's right.
Was able to get himself. He willed himself into, but it's because he changed his mind.
Yes.
And so I think that's what ultimately he saw himself as being a different person. And that's what he worked towards versus I just want to be able to swing a bat again.
Right.
Right.
Yes. And here's the thing. I mean, listen, the people that are listening to this are probably thinking, is this just another good habits book? Another self-help book? Danelle, why this book? What would you say?
Yeah, well, I would answer no, or we wouldn't give it this much attention by putting a full episode around. And it's funny because I was having this conversation with a friend the other day, and literally they called me out. Like, she's like, I didn't get into that book at all. And I'm like, why? And she's like, well, I don't know. It seemed like another habits, like how to be more productive type of a book. And I've read those before. I go, that's so interesting because I felt the same way about the framework, but not about the teaching. And she's like, what do you mean? And when I explained it, it piqued her interest again. It's like, she's like, okay, I'm interested in hearing, where that is coming from. So, and I think too, what I like about this book is that he talks about human behavior and how the influence of the external stimuli. So things that we can see in the goals, but also the internal emotions of our habits. Mm-hmm. And that's the ultimate magic of what he's been able to uncover is how the internal and the external line up together when we're successful in forming habits. And quite frankly, the opposite. The same thing is in play with when we're practicing bad habits.
Bad habits, yes.
So I would say that, again, he bases everything on the basis of human behavior. So it's things that we're conscious of and things that we're unconscious of. And so what he's trying to do is help us, maximize what we're conscious about, but then to also be able to identify the unconscious behaviors that can accelerate our success as it relates to routines and habits, and or that barriers that can keep us from being successful. So I think that's what makes this book different. I think that's the basis for what makes it unique and different. And I would say that there's two concepts that really stood out to me in the beginning part of the book, and that's compounding and then identity-based goals. And so all that he tied around that is what I believe makes it, again, an interesting, helpful read for leaders.
What did he say about compounding? I know there's a quote.
Yeah. I mean, he says that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement.
Yeah.
And I love that. And he says, it's so easy to overestimate the importance of one defining moment and underestimate the value of making small improvements on a daily basis. So too often we convince ourselves that massive success requires massive action, whether it's losing weight, building a business, writing a book, winning a championship, or achieving any other goal. So again, he says we tend to gravitate toward these grandiose outcomes versus the subtle consistency that is required to change one's identity.
Yeah, this was something that really resonated with the team. I remember we had, we went through the book chapter by chapter, but this particular part. So in other words, I don't need to, if I want to, he talks about diet. If I want to go on a diet tomorrow, maybe it's not about the 50 pounds I want to lose. That's the grandiose or whatever. It's about maybe you choose carrots over Cheetos.
Well, and again, we haven't gotten to that part yet relative to identity, but it's about choice. But what you want behaviors that ultimately guide your beliefs. So you want to be someone who eats healthy. I am
healthy, thus I don't eat Cheetos.
I do. Yeah. So, and I think too, on the compounding, he gives some really great examples. And again, this is a concept that I think you need to see in the book because there's a graph that makes this make more sense. Because I didn't just get this by reading it. I had to look at the graph to understand it. But he says you can get 1% better each day for 1 year. If you work at getting 1% better at something for 1 year, you'll end up 37 times better than by the time you're done. Conversely, if you get 1% worse each day doing something for a year, you'll decline nearly down to zero. And so again, there's a graph that explains that. And if we're restating that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement, then in the same way, it's the same thing as money multiplies through compound interest, right? So the effects of your habits multiply when you repeat them. And they seem to make a little difference on any given day, yet the impact they deliver over months and years can be enormous.
And I think people want quick fixes, and what he's proposing is not a quick fix. What he's proposing is that transformation is not a quick process.
No, he's saying it's not. However, it's, and I love the example that he gives about ice melting. And he talks about what happens to a solid piece of ice at 25 degrees, at 26 degrees, at 27 degrees, at 28, at 29, and then something miraculously happens at 32 and 33. But it was happening all along. The process for the ice to melt was happening all along. But it was like there was this inflection point. He talks about he calls it the plateau of something. I can't remember. Anyway, and it's interesting because in the podcast that he did with Brene Brown, this is where Brene Brown calls him straight out. He goes, that's where you lose people, is when you say, well, the 2 years that it took me to recover from my injury.
Right.
And then they have this really good banter around, do people want, intensity or consistency? And he goes, we always want intensity, meaning speed, right? Like we want the outcomes quickly.
Yes.
But he's like, but it's consistency over time that will produce the long lasting. And so if you're looking for a quick book to give you a habit so that you can, do something very goal centric, this book would help you, but so would other books. This book is different because it's really based on a belief system and transforming the identity. So the habit and the good habit ends up being almost the byproduct of what he's actually teaching here. So I think that's why it resonated with me, because to me, it didn't feel like the same old read. And until I got to the framework, and then the framework is actually, and he says it straight up, he's pulled that from another scientist. He just put color around it and kind of his own take on the framework for forming habits. So, and I think it's interesting too, because he talks about when he's finishing the concept around compounding, he says, your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits. And he says your net worth as a lagging measure of your financial health, as is your weight as a lagging measure of your eating habits. Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning habits. Your clutter is a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. And so it's interesting to read it that way too, is that it's our behaviors identify our identity. And so, thinking about it in that such, you can start to really think about habits as being something different than just this, the specific physical external thing we want to do to achieve something.
Yeah. I remember when we were studying this before and me having this revelation, and I'm having it again, these habits, these wonderful habits and outcomes, this is how we base our success as a business in terms of, okay, well, we have happy clients when we have informed clients. Well, in order to stay informed, we have to send weekly updates. I think that's a different, I know that that's a differentiator for us, just something very simple, but it's a habit of what we got into years ago, a long time ago, that our clients happen to love.
And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to be and this is the kicker, we wanted to be the type of company that never left a question mark for our clients.
Yes.
Because we knew what it felt like to feel like we didn't know what was going on. If we were working with a contractor, or if we were working with someone, and we wanted our clients to always know what we were working on that week. And so that formed our Monday updates.
That's right.
And that early on, it's because we wanted to be the type of company that proactively communicated with our clients to the best of our ability. That's different than me coming in and saying, just because I said so.
Yes.
Because you need another task, everybody at the company, we're going to send Monday updates to our customers.
Right.
And we do it internally too. So we update our internal customer and we update our external customers, because again, we want to be the type of company and marketers that communicate proactively. That's an identity. And I didn't realize that. I didn't realize it at the time, and that's what I hope for all of our listeners too, is that if you listen to this podcast, and certainly if you want a better version of, his teaching, I think the podcast with he and Brene is fantastic. It's a 2-part series. It's on Dare to Lead and Unlocking Us. It's the same episode. She just repeated it on Unlocking Us. And then obviously the book. But I think that is what I think you will find is that you probably have already done this because we have identities and they're encased with habits. And I think what's interesting is if you start to diagnose for yourself, oh, what are my habits that are improving the identity of who I want to be or become, and which habits are keeping me from that. That's what this teaching did for me, is I was able to assess, and at the time, oh, here's where I am actually practicing atomic habits.
Yes.
As a leader or as a mom or as a person, and here's the things I need to work on. And one of those, quite frankly, and it's the one that's obviously when we think of habits, it's easy to think about weight loss or, physical fitness or whatever it may be. And for me, it was at a time where I was really struggling. I was struggling for a number of reasons, but it was because I was thinking about working out as being a thing I had to do versus me being the type of person that is a walker. Identified, I wanted to be a walker. And so instead of just focusing on the 5 miles a day or whatever my goal was at the time, same way here, as long as I'm walking in New York, I'm fulfilling the identity of who I want to be. And so that is where I would say to you as listeners, so far that in this point, that's the number one. So the compounding is important because, he says you get what you repeat. Right. So he talks about, how, say, for instance, saying one nice thing to you as my podcast partner a day might not make a big difference. But if I do it every day over time, then that makes a big difference if it's something that we're consistent with. But if I just come in and one day tell you all these glorious, glamorous things about you, that's intense, right? It probably catch you off guard if I gave you a monologue of my love for you, Meg. And however, but if ever in the moments and in the times, if I'm providing you with compliments, then over time, you really do start to believe that about yourself and you see that in you. And likewise, I'm seeing it as well. So I think that, and he talks about how time magnifies the margin between success and failure. He said, good habits make your time your ally, while bad habits make your time your enemy. That was another concept that I think really stood out to us as a group, because timing is everything in marketing. That's right. And so if we don't have good processes, which I'm going to talk about that in a moment, that can really hinder you. And he says, habits are a double-edged sword. Bad habits can cut you down just as easily as good habits can build you up. That is why we need to know how habits work and how to design them to our liking so that we can avoid the dangerous half of the blade.
And to our liking is the key element there, because people don't like to change. I don't think people like change, and they think that habits are hard.
Yeah. And I think it's because I can explain exactly. He helped us understand that. And so, I think that begs the question of why is changing our habits so damn hard? And he states they're challenging for two reasons. Number one, we try to change the wrong thing. And he says, number two, we try to change our habits in the wrong way. So the first half of the book, he's helping us understand why we tend to change the wrong thing. So he's teaching us literally how habits are formed and how they work internally and externally. And then the framework for the main part of the book is about changing habits for the better. And here's a framework that he says he can, that he provides us to use. And so I've been alluding to it, but to me, the compounding was something that really stood out to us, and we were able to really grasp that as a group and as individuals. But then also how habits are tied to our identity. So I've alluded to it a bit, but he says there's basically 3 levels and types of habits. So there's goal-driven, system-driven, and identity-driven. And again, he says, if you think about it as, layers of an onion. So the outside would be goal-driven, things that are, their behavior. Like it's the most common way people try to change their behavior. For example, if you want to study an extra 2 hours to ace a test, that's the example he uses. That's a goal-driven behavior.
Got it.
And he says most of our goals or our habits are goal-driven. So I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to do a 5K. Again, to his example, I want to ace a test, so I'm going to study 2 more hours a night. And he says then the second set of habits are systems driven. And those are the ones that focus on systems or processes that will help us get to our goal versus just focusing on the goal itself. So for example, instead of saying, I just want to ace a test, so I'm going to study an extra 2 hours, I'm going to create a study routine that I use to help me ace every test. Okay, so that's a difference. It's a process change. And he says in the book, processes should drive goals. So if we have goal-driven habits, start with the process part first. And because ultimately, and the third being the identity driven habits, which, we perform because they match our beliefs. So these are habits that we do because we want to be a specific type of a person. And we want to have an identity that is XYZ. So in the case of studying, it would be, I want to be an academic all-star. Okay, well, what do academic all-stars do? Well, they have a routine for studying. They know how to study. They practice it on a regular basis. They do these things. Oh, and part of that is that they ace tests because they're going to study extra when they know that they need to in a particular circumstance. But, he, in this instance, he states that it's the identity. If we focus on changing our identity and then build process-centric goals, then the goals themselves, the specific tactical goals become a lot more of a attribute or a tool that we can use to enhance our identity. So that's the genesis of really, to me, what makes this book different. I know you asked it earlier, and I think I kind of dance around the answer, but that's what I believe makes this book special, is that when you start to think about it from an identity standpoint.
Yeah, that's when it really changes, and going through those 3: goal-driven, system-driven, identity-driven, really paints the difference.
Yeah, because, when you're leaning into identity-driven habits, we're behaving like the people we want to be. So it could be, yes, in this moment, I am this person. And it also can be a version of that and an aspiration for who we want to become. And he says, when you're committed to habits that drive you toward being that person, you're gaining evidence every day. You're gaining evidence and data, and then eventually believe that you are that person. And once you believe you are that person, you'll perform habits of that person just because it's who you are. It's just who you are. So for instance, I work towards becoming, creating an identity for myself that says I am an avid walker, period. So sometimes it's goal centric because I want to get in a certain amount of miles in a given week. And then I have processes for it too. Like I know I need to do these things in order to be able to get that walk in. So I've had to create processes that make that happen. And I've had to tweak certain things, create other habits here in New York versus what I was able to do in, Dallas, because I had a 4-mile walk that I did every day. And, I knew exactly if the weather presented different things, exactly at what temperature I needed to change what I was wearing. Well, I've had to redo that here in New York, and I've had to work on different aspects because I'm walking on flat concrete. That's different than the hills and I was able to, I don't know, I had a different atmosphere.
Right.
So that is, again, it's something that because I had changed my identity around becoming an avid walker, that when my environment changed, I then was able to adapt the already good habits I had in place in Dallas and be able to make them work for me here in New York. It took me a minute and I'm still working on it, but that's an example that I can see that came to life and it continues to come to life for me.
Yeah, I can think of, I remember when we studied this, I remember thinking, okay, as a leader, what would I want a habit to become? Like what can I do? And thinking back on those days, we've talked about them multiple times on this podcast, 2015, 2016, and even beyond, when we were struggling as leaders. I was struggling personally to make a connection, what I felt like was a real connection with people for us to be able to make improvements and make progress together so that the business could carry on versus them walking out the door, which was a problem. Well, I had to take a step back, and this book, you helped me with this, thinking about this book. Okay, I have to take a step back and I want to be the kind of leader who is able to receive grievances, compliments, what have you, anything a team member wants to share. And I want to be the kind of leader who can accept it with grace and offer help. I was leaving out the grace and I was leaving out the help prior to. People could come to me and I just might be stuck in a, frozen state of possum. Oh no, shock, Yeah. And I didn't know what to do. So in order to become the kind of leader that actually is able to respond and articulate, okay, how are we going to work on that together? I had to start with me, right? I had to look at myself. The Enneagram certainly helped with that, understanding my weaknesses and shortcomings and figuring out how to turn those into better behaviors and more sustainable behaviors as a leader. So it doesn't have to be, it can be anything in your life. I've also learned too, Janelle, after reading this book, is listen to how people describe you. For me, I don't notice this as much as at work in terms of criticism, but I notice this a lot at home with a teenager. I hear this a lot. You don't ever pick up your phone. You don't ever answer. I always answer texts, but no, I can't stop everything all the time and get up out of a meeting and excuse me to answer a phone call about, can I have Whataburger for dinner? Like, I don't want to be that person. So having that feedback to people, I'm talking about my kid, but yeah, he's right. I'm not the kind of person who always answers my phone because I don't trust that it's worth the time to break, So anyway, you have to kind of use discernment in your life as if you dive into Atomic Habits and if you read it at the level that Danelle's presenting it to us today, it will make a difference. You have to start with that. But first you have to understand where you're lacking. And sometimes doing that, we know what cool things that we want to do. And I want to be I want to be the kind of person that can run a marathon, okay, well, me actually doing that and saying it are two different things. So you got to mean it, first of all. And then you got to know where your weaknesses are.
And I think he says that what he helps us understand is that he says that most of us never consider an identity change when we set out to improve.
Yes.
We don't think about it as an identity change. We just think about, we cut to the outcome. Like we get straight to the point. We want to lose 10 pounds.
Yes.
We don't spend the time that it takes to say, okay, what type of person?
Yes.
What does the type of person who is 10 pounds less, what do they do? What do they practice?
Totally.
How do they show up? And he says,
live?
We never shift the way we look at ourselves so that the old identity tends to sabotage us because it's just, we're focused on a goal. And he says the ultimate form of intrinsic motivation is when it has become a part of our identity. When habits have become a part of our identity, that's when true transformation happens. And he says, the more pride you have in any particular aspect of your identity, the more motivated you will be to maintain the habits associated with it. And he says, true behavior change is identity change. And he's right. Yeah, true behavioral change is identity change. And so some of the examples of that are, he says, the goal is not to read the book. The goal is to become the reader. The goal is to not run a marathon. It's to become a runner. And the goal is to not learn an instrument. The goal is to become a musician. So those were just easy, digestible things for us to remember. Those of us who really, have used this to transform parts of their lives. And I love those examples. Like, wait a minute, Danelle, who do you want to be in, relative to this? And I mean, had to do that moving here to New York.
Yeah.
Like,
yep.
What type of,
Yep.
New Yorker, quote unquote, do you want to become? And it's like the one that never leaves being a Texan. However, I'm here now and for the time being. And so, yeah, when you start to think about it, you can see it in large scale things in your life, and then also either private or in the way you show up in relationships, the type of friend you want to be, the type of mom you want to be, you fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And so I will, I love that correlation. So
That's really good. So in terms of everyday activities, what does he talk about relative to that?
Okay. And please, like, I hope you all will listen to this episode. And if you made it this far, you're already there. So might as well go ahead and finish it, right? We got a good music moment coming up. But I do highly recommend, and we'll put the link in the show notes to the 2 episodes with Brene Brown. I mean, they're such fans of each other, but the way that they teach is so similar. So it was just, it's just yummy. But he says this in the podcast. She literally stops him and makes him repeat it. Like she's moaning when she's listening to him talk. But he says that every action we take is a vote for the type of person we wish to become. Think about that for a minute. Every action we take is for the type of person we wish to become. And he says, habits are how you embody a particular identity. He said, so every day, if you make your bed, you embody the identity of someone who is tidy. If you give a compliment to a team member on a regular basis, or you do that on a regular, we embody the identity of someone who cares or who is paying attention. He says, if you go to the gym, even if for 5 minutes, you still embody the identity who's someone that is committed to going to the gym. And so he says that habits are typically focused on external productivity. And he says, and certainly habits can help you lose weight. They can help you make more money, good ones, that is. And they can, help you get more done. And so it's really often based on this productivity. And I think that's where the other books and the other teachings, where there can be similarities in this book, but it's because he does ultimately have to focus on the external part of it. But I think what he says about the real reasons why habits work is because they reinforce the kind of person we want to be. And to me, that's the most impactful statement that really ties all this together. And he says, habits cast votes, which over time can shape our identity. It's how we see ourselves eventually and how others start to see us. I have some people will call me an avid walker. It's not like I say I'm an avid, I have to say it. It's because of what I do. And that 9 times out of 10, you might call me. I've either come in from a walk, I'm on a walk, or I'm complaining because I haven't gone. And so it's just part of who I am. And I also love on that podcast, he talks about that beliefs and behaviors are a two-way street. He says the way you act or behave influences the way you believe. On the other side is what you believe influences your actions. He said, but he argues that to let the behavior lead the way. Start with one small push-up, write 1 sentence a day. Listen to the Extra podcast on leadership, whatever it may be that changes your behavior, that will ultimately lead to the evidence and the data that you need to change that belief about yourself. And therefore, once you believe, others will believe it as well. And I know from a leadership standpoint, I didn't have to sit you all down and say, I finally made it. I'm a better leader. I never had to say that to you. I could see it. I could see that my commitment and my journey utilizing atomic habits, I didn't know I was in some cases. In some cases, by the time I read this book, I had to switch some things around because in some cases I had some poorly constructed habits that were only goal oriented. But and I think about it as a company, we care about sales. We have to. But when we started putting that we wanted to be a company that made the people that worked there a better version of themselves, when that became a metric that we put above everything else, and we talk about that in episodes 2 and 3 when we talk about our culture and how it was in the tank and what we needed to do, one of those was to operationalize evidence and processes. So again, the process of being a company that cares about its people and their development, both as professionals and as people. And so I love that concept from him, is that the behavior will ultimately lead to the belief. And so what I was starting off on that little rant was that I believed it because I could see it in all of you. And so I knew that I was a better version of a leader. Now, I don't want to I always want that to be a journey. So I don't want to have made it, because I want it to be part of my ongoing self, is to be a better version of who I am today than I was yesterday. So I think, again, that concept was just these simple concepts that he provides us is such great framework for remembering and being able to easily identify these things in our everyday life.
Habits, I think, can sometimes be construed as like shackling or lacking in freedom. And I think he shared some stuff about that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. He says habits do not restrict freedom. They create it. In fact, the people who don't have their habits handled are often the ones with the least amount of freedom. And I mean, that stood out to me. Mm-hmm. And so what he's saying, what I hear him saying, is that if you don't own your time,
you're running
with
you're just
solid, then poor behaviors and habits are going to own it for you, and then that is going to produce an outcome and an identity that you're not going to feel great about, most likely. So I think, before we get into, and we're just going to tee up the framework, because that's 4 separate episodes that we would need to go through, and I'll tee that up. But yeah, I think that habits, it's like January. This is a perfect example. People, we've all done it. I've done it. I can't count how many times that calendar rolls over, and boy, I'm going to lose 5 or 10 pounds in January. I'm going to hit the gym. I'm going to eat different. I'm going to do all these things. And they're so goal oriented that in that commitment, and I'm not saying that we don't need to jumpstart. And like he said, he's like, habits, goal oriented habits work. They can work for you, but they usually have an end date. And he says, so if you want lasting change in your life, the way to that is through changing your identity.
And I want to be someone
habits. And habits shape our identity. And so they can be restrictive. Mm-hmm. They shouldn't have to be. That doesn't mean that they're not hard and that there's not commitment. If you're trying to learn how to run a marathon when you've never ran, well, 26 miles is a long ass way.
To go.
Long way, or recovering from an injury or whatever it may be. Most often the things that are most rewarding do require that consistency over intensity. But we can't help it. We're humans. Of course we want it quicker, faster, better, earlier. Who doesn't? At the end of the day, if we want that to last to where it benefits beyond a particular goal, then we need to take these lessons to heart from James Clear. So
the science behind it. So, and these were the 4 areas that you were talking about that we could talk about on a whole different podcast, right? We could dive.
I'll just tee it up just for his framework is 4 simple steps.
Okay.
He calls it cue, craving, response, reward. So essentially what he's saying is that rewards are the end goal of every habit. So even though his framework is cue, craving, response, reward, ultimately we're trying to get to the reward. And so he says the cue is about noticing it. The craving is about wanting it. And the response is about attaining it, like how we're going to do it. So if you think about it in that sense, he's put together, and again, I think his framework is not necessarily something that's groundbreaking new. I mean, this is, and I think he's taken this from another psychologist, but it's how he, in my opinion, how he teaches this framework. I think it's his style that I'm attracted to at this point in the book. It's just, he makes it easy. And I want to invite all of you. He has an incredible newsletter that comes out every Thursday. And it takes you 5 minutes to read it. And it's 3 concepts from his teachings. And then it's quotes that he pulls from other places. And I love it. I use it with the team all the time. In fact, I have a funny story about that.
Okay.
You know what I'm going to talk about? You know what I'm going to say? Jordan's giggling right now, I promise. Okay, so what I want you all to know listeners, is that we have a Teams, and we used to have Slack. I miss Slack, by the way. I miss Slack. If you're listening, give us a better deal so we can go back to it. But anyway, is that we have a motivation channel, and I love to put quotes in there, and we love to put in things that motivate us into our channels. And so I would put stuff in there by James Clear, but I would just do his quote and I would type in JC. So one day the team just let me kept doing that forever. And so then finally, I don't know if it was Marcy or somebody was like, I think it's cool that, you've paraphrased the teachings of Jesus Christ. And you are putting them in our channel. I think that's so amazing. And then I think it was Jordan. I don't remember how the story goes, but I just remember it being about the fact that half the team thought that it was Jesus Christ, and the other half thought it was Jordan's. Just, I'm quoting Jordan, and
her initials are JC. Yeah, because she would just put the quote and then she'd do dash JC. Well, that leaves it up to interpretation. I Jesus Christ, Jordan Confer, who, James Clear. So it was funny.
No one guessed James Clear until I told everybody, like, oh, all that, it's been him the whole time.
Yeah.
I go, yeah.
We went a good 3 to 4 months of just quote after quote being like, oh, she's going biblical. All right. And I don't remember Jesus saying that, but okay. Sure. It sounds smart. Well,
anyway, I thought we would end with that.
Yeah. This is great. It definitely has made a difference in our business and our own lives individually. Yeah. And so we think it can help you too. Yeah,
I can't recommend it enough. And we would not have just put in any old book on, there's plenty of habit forming books out there. And I think this one's special.
Mm-hmm. It really is. Okay. Let's transition to our music moment, which today we wanted to talk about Grammys.
Yes, that was last night for us.
It was last night, yeah. And so even though y'all are hearing this on the 13th, February the 13th, or the week of the 13th, we can still talk about the Grammys. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It was full of surprises, I thought. I felt like...
Well, it was the first time the show's been on in 2 years.
Yeah.
They missed 2 years.
2 years. The way it was laid out, I thought the seating arrangement was interesting. But the competition was so steep. Man, I mean, yikes, to be in some of those categories with that level of artistry. I mean, you could tell, I think that was the big takeaway from the Grammys was nobody thought they were going to win it because the competition was so fierce. So it kind of all shook out in an interesting way. So we just wanted to recap that for a minute. No surprise here, Adele's Easy on Me won Best Pop Solo Performance. And funny note, that is one of your...
Well, Spotify said that was the song I listened to the most in 2022. So
imagine Denelle walking in Dallas or in New York, trying to Adele it.
Adele it?
On the High Line. Yeah. Like, I think, what is it? He's Precious, the man who hosted it last night. I can't.
From the
Daily Show. I'm going completely blank. But he's
Noah something.
Noah, yeah. He said, I sing Adele. He's like, I feel like I sing like Adele in the shower. He's like, but you actually do sound like Adele in the shower. And she kind of made this face like, okay. But it's like that. Like, I think we all think we sound like her, and really we don't.
No.
Yeah.
No, we don't.
We don't. Nobody does. So.
But just a side note there, that she's just
stunning. Stunning.
And funny.
Yeah.
I want to have a glass of wine with Adele.
I know. She was having a good time last night. I wanted to party with them. She and Lizzo. They were sitting at the same table in that weird seating area. Okay. And then Beyonce was like 1 or 2 tables over with Jay-Z. Won, I don't even know how many. Last night she won. But
she won before, like the awards they give out before. So she was already close. And then I think when she won her second live one, that's what put her over. She's the all-time leading Grammy winner of all time. Yeah. Of all genres.
So amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
you could just see, I don't know. I felt a humility from her that I hadn't necessarily sensed before.
Same.
Did you feel it too?
I did. And I think it was because the competition was so fierce. Like, even Beyonce didn't think she was going to win. Adele didn't think she was going to win.
Isn't that the album that's more dance centric?
Yes.
Like it's not a pop album.
Correct.
So for that that's not usual.
No. I mean, my husband kept saying, is that in the wrong category? Is that in the wrong category? I was like, it's the right category. Okay. She just branched out and she gonna dominate that too. You know what I mean?
She puts her mind to something, that's for damn sure.
Yes. Best rap album, Kendrick Lamar. Not a surprise there. We listen to a lot of Kendrick Lamar in our house. Best record, Lizzo. I think not a sleeper. Not a sleeper. She is an amazing and talented artist. That album we love it. Like, listen to it all the time.
Send me songs all the time, yeah.
Yeah, but she was just taken aback. Again, she didn't think she was going to win it. She's sitting at the table with Adele. Adele just walked away with best pop solo performance. And then here comes Lizzo taking the best record. So she gave the best speech about it. Talk about humble. So precious. I want to be friends with her. I want to hang out with she and Adele.
Yes, that would be great.
Can we hang out? Okay. And then she had a tip of her hat to Beyonce and said, she's the reason why she wanted to sing good music. Mm-hmm. Music about good things. Are we aware that we are living in a time when music that's uplifting people, their state of mind, their mental health after the pandemic, are we aware that we're living in a time when awards are being given to people who are writing music that is uplifting emotionally? I think that's really important. A big takeaway from last night. Mm-hmm. And she felt like she didn't belong for a long time. And I can say the same thing for our girl Brandy.
Yes.
In These Silent Days was nominated
last night.
And I mean, it's a good album. It's about good.
Right.
So if we take a look around, maybe I don't know. People complain a lot.
But you look at the songs that won the biggest awards of the night had that theme, Harry's album, and so the album of the year, I couldn't choose between Brandy and Adele because both of those albums influenced me and so much.
An anchor of
so
2022.
much.
Yeah.
And then so for Harry to win, it was cool because I don't know. You talk about surprised. He did not see that coming.
Well, how do you?
And that was a great album too, but it was
so good.
I don't know.
And we've talked about that here on the podcast, y'all.
Yes.
How we love that album. It was a really good year for music. And I don't know that it was any better or worse than any other year. I was just really aware of it last year. It just so happens that our favorite albums, Danelle, ended up being nominated for the best damn albums of the year.
It's because we have good taste.
I guess. I mean, I was thinking.
I only need to figure that out.
Dang. We good. Adele, Brandy Carlisle, which we can't not talk about her ever. We talk about her all the time. Duh. She was nominated for best this and that.
I know, and I loved it because they had her wife, Kath, which we talk about her too, and her two precious girls, introduced them, and we've been able to see them at the concert. So that was a special treat. I thought that was so cute.
They're a theme, yeah.
It was a great award show. I was hoping Grammys can be hit or miss, in my opinion, because sometimes there's music on there, our performances. I'm like, what in them?
Well, there was just the one.
Well, there was that one, and it makes me think. It makes me think broader than my sometimes narrow narrow mind can think. So if we're going to reflect back on the episode, whatever number that was, about having an open mind,
we need to have it.
Sometimes the Grammy can teach us. It can be a good teaching moment for open-mindedness.
True.
I had to have an open mind a few times last night. Yeah.
True. And we're not talking about the ode to the rap music, which 50 years of rap music, I think, is what it was.
Great celebration.
Oh my gosh. I thought I was going to die because I wasn't feeling so hot. So I didn't get up and like dance around, but I wanted to really bad because hip hop has been a huge part of my life, and it was great. So can't say enough. If y'all recorded it, watch it, or maybe you can catch it on direct. What's that called? Like when you pull it down? I don't know. Download?
On demand.
Oh, that's it. On demand.
On download. Okay.
And this is why my son makes fun of me. I don't even know what that is. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, y'all. Thank you, Danelle, for all the information about Atomic Habits. I know it's going to be a good resource for all of you listening. Remember, we will have some links in the show notes, especially to those episodes that Danelle mentioned with Brene Brown and James Clear. We definitely want to give you some direction on that. Mm-hmm. Be sure to tell a friend about the podcast. If you like what you heard, we'd appreciate it very much. And we send you into the week with grateful hearts.
Goodbye, everyone.
As always, you can connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Self Smarter Podcasts. You can also leave a rating or review if you enjoyed what you heard today. Not only does this mean so much to us, but it also helps other leaders and future leaders find our community. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us in becoming self-smarter. This podcast is produced by Snacks Media, and music is from a free platform. Well, that is until Brandy Carlisle reaches out to us to write the original score for our podcast. Friends, have a great rest of your day.